All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to what is today now? Tuesday. Good morning, Nicholas. My days are all screwed up. We had quiz day on Thursday, and then Friday was a holiday, and then I wasn't here yesterday, and so I don't know what day of the week it is, but apparently my computer says it's Tuesday, so I'm gonna go with that. Um, I hope everyone had a nice long weekend. Um, Probably not a bad time of the term to have a long weekend right at the end when people either need it to get work done or just maybe need a bit of an extra day for a rest. But um, yeah, so Abby is here. Good morning, Abby. Shania is here. Good morning, Shania. Mulder's here. Good morning, Mulder. And Simrat is here. Good morning, Simrat. Um, all right, let's jump in and try to remember what we were talking about nearly a week ago, as it was. Um, so, a week ago or so, we were talking about class, right? And we said that class was kind of your relative ranking in society, and it had to do with, it could have to do with all sorts of things, right? So, depending on what society you live in and what society you belong to, um, people measure status in different ways, and what's important in one society may or may not be important in another one, right? So people's social rank can be related to all kinds of different measures of them, right? So it can have to do with their wealth, it can have to do with their power, and we said that power can be in sort of a bunch of different types, right? And so I showed you a picture of these three guys here. Again, the guy in the top corner doesn't count. He doesn't really have any power, but these other three guys do. And we said that they all have different kinds of power, right? Bill Gates here on the far left, he has lots of financial power. He's the founder of Microsoft. He has more money than God, and he can do a lot of things with that money, right? And it turns out he does. He does lots of philanthropic things. He does lots of things for charity now, but he still has tons and tons of money and can do things because of that. The guy in the middle here is the Dalai Lama. He's the leader of Tibetan Buddhism, and kind of the unofficial leader of Tibet as well. He has a lot of social power, right? He's kind of the leader of a major world religion, and he's also someone that people respect, right? He's seen as a man of peace and a man of wisdom, and so when the Dalai Lama says something, you know, many people tend to listen to him, right? So he has a lot of social power. As it turns out, he's also pretty wealthy, but again, he doesn't really live. He doesn't drive around in Lamborghinis or anything like that. But that would be quite a sight. But he doesn't do that. But he has lots of social power, and of course, Justin Trudeau here on the right, he has lots of political power, right? So he's the Prime Minister of Canada. He's been elected to office and serves as the Prime Minister. Lots of political power and a bit of social power in Canada as well, because again, his father was Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who was Prime Minister in the 70s and 80s, and so he's a name, right? Even before he was Prime Minister, when people said Justin Trudeau, people kind of knew who he was, right? When you say Mike Metcalf, nobody knows who that guy is, right? I'm not well known in Canada yet, although my YouTube channel has like 50 subscribers, so I'm almost an influencer. Yeah, maybe soon, maybe next term. Yeah, so Justin has a bit of social power. People kind of know who he is. His father was an important guy, but really political power is really what he has at the moment. And so what we're talking about here is classism, right? The idea that the systematic oppression of poor and working class people by people who control resources, right? By people who have major companies and therefore control jobs, people who have lots of money and can influence the government, people who control housing, they may own lots of land. Classism is held in place by all of these people, right? And these people are they have a vested in, they are very rich and very wealthy and powerful, and they have an interest in staying that way, right? We said that classism is held in place by a number of ideologies, right? And part of that has to do with not stereotypical, but social messaging and stereotypes, right? So we often think of rich people as very cultured, very classy, very intelligent, very smart, right? And lower class people are seen as kind of dumb and backwards and kind of unsophisticated in a way, right? And so those things, those sort of stereotypes and ideas like meritocracy and individualism, those kind of ideas keep people in those positions, right? And so the idea is, why are people working low-paying jobs? Well, because they're, not smart enough for high-paying jobs, or they're too lazy, right? Why do some people have high-paying jobs? Well, they must be the smartest people, or they must work hardest, right? But again, that's not. There are grains of truth to those ideas, but they are not 100% true 100% of the time. There are other factors that are involved, and we've talked about some of those factors, right? Gender plays a role, right? Race plays a role. Ability plays a role. In Quebec, religious affiliation plays a role, right? And so it's not so simple as, the lower classes are stupid and lazy and the upper classes are intelligent and hardworking, right? Although people in the upper class would like you very much to believe that that is the case, but it's not. Right, so both of these ideas here, meritocracy, the idea that your success is based on your personal talent and your amount of hard work, and individualism, the idea that people are free to make whatever choice they want. Both of those are ideologies that support classism, right? And again, we know that hard work and talent are not the only variables in success, and we also know that people aren't necessarily free to make all of their own choices, right? You are constrained by all of those identities, right? By your race, your gender, your ethnicity, your nationality, your sexuality, your religious affiliation, your age. All of those things constrain you in various ways, and it makes some things easier to do, and it makes some things more difficult to do. So, so we see these kind of ideologies show up in a couple of places. The American dream is a popular one, and again, the American dream is that anybody can make it, right? Anyone can come to America. They can have nothing but the clothes on their back, and they can be a star, right? Or they can be super successful. There's lots of movies where this is the plot line, right? Somebody comes to America and makes it big, right? There's lots of movies like that. And again, those movies are based on this idea of the American dream. And the sad reality is that it's just not really that true. For some people it is, right? And there's lots of these kind of rags to riches stories where people actually wind up starting with nothing and winding up being wildly wealthy or wildly successful. There are stories like that, but for every one of those stories, there are thousands of others that just do not turn out that way, right? And as it turns out, America, we'll talk about this a little bit later, probably tomorrow. America is actually a difficult country to get ahead in, right? So you're far from it being, any individual can make it. It's more likely that if you come from a wealthy, rich, white family, your odds of being successful are far, far greater, right? And should we talk about him now? We probably shouldn't, but I guess now that I've stopped to do it. Donald Trump is kind of a perfect example of this. Does anyone know anything about his backstory? Like Donald Trump's earlier life?
His dad was successful at work.
Yeah, his dad was very successful in real estate.
Then he used his dad's power to gain power as well.
Yeah, so his dad loaned him a bunch of money early on, millions of dollars early on, for real estate deals, and then Donald took over the company itself, and the company was worth. Good morning, and the company was worth millions and millions and millions of dollars when he took it over. He went to a pretty fancy school, right? I think I looked last term at the university he went to, the private university, and I think tuition is $40,000 a year at the university that Donald Trump went to. 40. Yeah. So again, can anyone go to that school? I sure as heck can't. I don't know. I won't speak for the rest of you, but I can't afford $40,000 a term for tuition. That's insanity, right? So again, are all the best students going to this prestigious university? Not necessarily. The richest ones are, not necessarily the best ones. But again, Donald Trump will try to tell you a story about how he made it on his own, right? How he worked his way up, and he was successful all through his own smarts, and how he knows how to make deals and things like that. There's something he just knows everything, right? And it's like whether he does or doesn't, and I don't think he does, but whether he does or doesn't, he had a huge advantage, right? He's white, he's an American citizen, he's male, he was born into a super wealthy family, and basically inherited all of that wealth, right? And so again, it's much easier for him to be successful than it is for the average person. And in fact, again, and I don't know every detail of his backstory, so I won't, hopefully I'm not making a mistake here, but he's actually not been that successful of a businessman. If you look at the real estate deals that he's made and the projects he's been involved in a lot of cases, they haven't really turned out very well at all. And in fact, lots of people lost money. He's lost money. The fact is that he actually has enough to lose, and people keep bailing him out. And so, he kind of has money because he started out with money, not because he didn't start from zero and go to $1 billion. He started out with $1 billion and now has like 1.2, which is not that impressive. And again, when you have money, it's a lot easier to make it. If you don't have any money, much more difficult, right? So, again, this idea that anyone can make it is to some degree true, but it's also much more likely that you will be successful if you come from, if you're starting ahead, right? And Donald Trump started a lot further ahead than most people do, right? In terms of his social identities, which are, he belongs to all of the dominant groups, basically. He's got friends and powerful people to help him, and he started out with a ton of money and a successful company, right out of the gate. And arguably he's ruined that company now, but I guess we'll find out how that goes for him. Anyway, this is the reality though. So again, the idea that anyone can be anything they want in the US, and anybody can make it, anybody can be successful, very popular in film, not very popular in real life, right? So if you look at the statistics, you'll see that only about 6% of children born to parents in the lowest economic class will rise to the top. So again, if you are born into poverty, if you're born into a poor household, the odds are pretty large that you're going to stay there, right? You're not going to be able to work your way up. If you look in the US, you'll see that the 10 richest people are all white men. All or nearly all were born into wealthy families. Donald Trump is one of those, right? And again, think of Donald Trump's children, right? They all went to fancy private universities as well, right? They have all the best clothes. They have fancy cars and live in lavish apartments, right? They can connect with people who have money and power as well, right? They're going to have people like Ivanka and Barron, his son Barron, when he's old enough. They're going to have every advantage in society, right? They're going to have every advantage to be successful. And again, most people just do not have that. And the further down the economic ladder you go, the fewer advantages people have, right? The less money, the less time, the less support from others. And again, once you get to the bottom, it becomes very difficult to raise yourself to the top. And again, most people in the US don't do it, okay? We'll come back to this a little bit later, but what we're talking about here is social mobility, okay? So in your society, is it socially mobile? Can you actually move up the economic ladder? Is it easier to do that or more difficult? Right? Some countries like Sweden and Norway, it's actually much easier. Their social mobility is higher. In countries like the United States, social mobility is much lower, even though there is a myth, there is a ideology of the American dream where anyone can make it. Okay, so before we go any further, let's kind of divide these classes out, okay? So you can do this in a bunch of different ways. And so depending on who you talk to, different academics, different writers will kind of divide up society in a bunch of different ways. So I'm going to suggest that we just use this for these 4 groups just to talk about it. You can divide it into 3 or into 5 or whatever. There's lots of different ways. So here we can divide people in the US and Canada into these 4 groups. So we can describe people as belonging to the owning class, okay? So these people have inherited wealth, okay? They have trust funds, they have investments, they have land, they may have shares in companies, and because they have all this money, technically they don't really have to work, okay? So they can actually live off the income of their investments and their trust funds and all these sorts of things, okay? So these people have a lot of money. They don't necessarily have to work, although depending on the generation, lots of them do. But usually you find the older generation that makes the money are usually the ones that work, and the younger generation that inherits it usually don't. They just go around and spend it. But these are people belonging to the owning class, right? They have money, they have power, and they don't really have to have jobs if they don't want to. Okay. Middle class are, I don't know that that's most of us. In theory, most of us belong to either the middle or the working class. Okay, so middle class people use their bodies and their minds to work for income, right? And so that's me, right? I mostly use my mind. I don't use my body because I'm sitting here with my feet up every day, so it's there's not much physical body work going on, but I use my mind. I have an advanced degree or two, and I use that to earn a living, right? And so people in the middle class here tend to own their own homes, and they tend to be able to pay their kids to go to, or pay for their kids to go to university. So these people have, relatively good incomes. They can afford houses, they can afford college funds for their kids. They still have to work, but they're reasonably financially stable, okay? Working class people are people who sometimes use their bodies and minds to work for income, um, but usually they have lower levels of education. Um, so they'll have a high school education and then they'll have a trade. So they'll be carpenters or plumbers or bus drivers or whoever, right? Um, Sometimes they own their own homes, sometimes they rent, and they might not be able to afford to send their kids to university. Again, these classes are they overlap a little bit, right? There are some trades that actually make a lot of money, right? Whereas some middle class people, say teachers, depending on where you work, incomes can be lower, right? So you can kind of have some overlap between the middle class and the working class. I don't know about you. When I grew up, we were kind of about halfway between these two as well. So we owned our own home. My dad sold furniture like this. We owned our home, but he couldn't pay to send us to university, and so my sister and I we had to find jobs and we had to pay for it ourselves, which we did. But so we were kind of like halfway between working and middle, if you will. So yeah, there's overlap, right? And then you've got poor people. So people who are reliant on government assistance, so they might need unemployment insurance sometimes, they might be on welfare, they might go periods without jobs, they might go periods without homes, they might only be able to find jobs that pay them minimum wage, and they tend to live below the poverty line, okay? The poverty line differs depending on what country you're talking about, right? So some countries it's cheaper to live in, so the poverty line is lower. But generally, and you can measure poverty line in a bunch of different ways, but for our purposes, let's just say that if you are living below the poverty line, you are someone who cannot afford basic food, clothing, and shelter, okay? So those are kind of your three basic needs. I know Wi-Fi too, but let's just go with food, clothing, and shelter. If you are living below the poverty line, you cannot afford all those things at the same time, okay? So maybe you're paying your rent, but sometimes there's not a lot of food, right? Or you're, wearing, the cheapest clothes you can find and you can't really afford to replace them. Or so you're living at a very kind of basic level of existence, right? And again, it gets a little bit, you're living so close to the edge of homelessness, living very close to the edge of going hungry. Yeah, these are people living around and below the poverty line, okay? So 4 classes. So let me ask you a question here. And my question for you is this. How much wealth, in percent, how much wealth do you think each of these categories has? So if 100% of the money in Canada or the US were kind of sitting on the table in front of us, how much would the owning class have? How much would the middle class have? How much would the working class have? What do you think? Let's start with owning class. How much of the country's wealth do you think these guys have? $70? Wow, okay. Keep in mind here that the owning class, that we're talking about the 1%, right? This is the top of the top, the richest of the richest. They have 70% of the wealth. There is not many of them, that is for sure. What do you think? 30, 35? Sorry? 40? Adam, what do you think? 50? Okay. So, okay, we're anywhere between 40 and 70. Okay. What about the middle class? So, how much wealth do they? So, this is a bigger group of people, right? Teachers, doctors, lawyers, engineers, accountants, financial controllers, people who run smaller companies. All of these are middle class people. What do you think? How much wealth do you think they have? Keep in mind that is most of us. 50? 20? 50? Okay. 28? Very specific. Okay. What about the working class? Again, there's lots of working class people in Canada and the US, but they're lower on the economic ladder. Is it eight? Like 8%? Okay.
10, 12.
10 or 12? 20. Okay. And what about the poor people now?
5.
5, 10, 2? 2? Okay. I should probably give you some stats with people below the poverty line. I think. Oh, how many people live? Good morning, Blake. I think, unfortunately, I think it's about 13% in Canada. Is that right? No, I've got a, don't quote me on that. I've got a stat. I've got statistics later on in the. Maybe that's the American statistic, not the Canadian. We'll come back to that in a bit. Okay, so good estimates. Good estimates. Let's see if we're correct. Okay. So I've got a short video that talks about this. Online people, I've put the video link in Microsoft Teams for you to watch. So we'll just watch it really quickly. We'll come back and we'll see kind of how accurate we were. Okay, back in a minute. So what do you think? Is it as bad as you thought, or is it worse than you thought? It's pretty bad, isn't it? Yeah. Huh? I don't think it was a symbolic one person, but those are the richest of the rich, right? So those are those are your Jeff Bezos, your Elon Musk, your Steve Jobs, your Bill Gates, who else is super wealthy? There's probably a few others, but they tend to stay out of the spotlight, right? But that's pretty significant, right? And again, that's way different than people's ideal, right? And again, it doesn't matter. We've talked about how the United States is very kind of polarized. The Republicans hate the Democrats, and the Democrats hate the Republicans, and nobody can agree on anything. But interestingly, both sides do agree on how wealth should be distributed. But again, it's not anywhere close to that in real life, and it's not even close to what people think is going on, right? So that middle chart is how Americans think the wealth in America is distributed. But again, they are incorrect, right? It's way worse than that. I have a question to ask you, but I'm going to save it for a little bit later. So things are pretty unequal. I think we can agree. This is that's a pretty unequal situation there. How do you think this type of inequality got created? How did we get to this point? Especially when the video pointed out that the richest 1% were taking 9% of the wealth 45 years ago. Now they're taking 24, right? How do we manage to get from there to here? Why do the richest people keep getting richer and everyone else just kind of stays where they are or gets poorer? How does that happen? Okay, they have money, but they seem to be getting more of it.
Yeah, so they can afford to take risks, the risk.
What kind of risks?
For example, investments and all that. They can invest in whatever they want, and some of them probably work, some of them probably succeeded, so they can still earn money.
Yeah, they're well, and I think I might even back off and just say that, investing allows them to make money, right? When you have investments, they are, your money is making money, right? You don't have to do anything, right? Part of the problem with people at the lower end of the economic ladder is that they're paid hourly, right? They get paid for an hour of work. How many hours a day can you work? Legally 8, right? Even if there were no labor laws, how long do you think you could work before you collapse in exhaustion? Maybe. Yeah, maybe even if you went all out, right, and you just worked and slept, and that's all you did, you could still only cram in about 15 hours a day. And again, eventually you would burn out and collapse, right? You can't keep that up. So one of the problems for the poor is that they're working hourly and there's only so many hours in the day, right? The only way to make more is work more, but you just can't work, there's a limit, right? There's a real ceiling to how much you can actually work. But again, if you're investing, your money can work for you, right? And you don't have to do anything at all. What else do you think has been happening? Why else do you think economic inequality has gotten greater? Hmm.
You could say money laundering.
Money laundering? Do you know what money laundering is?
Almost.
Almost? Do you want to take a shot at what money laundering is? No? Does anyone know what money laundering is?
Like people or steal poor people money.
No. What is it? Nope. Nope.
What's our
Money laundering is this. Money laundering is this. The problem is that the government. Hopefully, I'm not telling you how to money launder. That's not what this class is about. The government keeps track of money all over the place, right? And so there are financial records of everything you do, right? So, who here has a bank account? Who here has a credit card or debit card? Who here has money deposited into their account? Who here pays tuition and things out of that account, and food and clothing and whatever else? Yeah. So there are records, there are financial records of you doing all of that stuff, right? And so the problem is, well, if you work a normal job like me, right? The college pays me. The college sends tax documents to the government at tax time, so the government knows how much I earned. They charge me tax on it. And if they think that I am underreporting, so if they think I make more money than I actually say that I do, they can check my financial records, right? And of course, what they'll find is that it squares, right? The money goes in, the money comes out, it all adds up, right? But if I had, a $4 million house, and I had a fancy Mercedes Benz, and I had, a bunch of Rolexes and things like that, and I was buying all those things, right? But I was only making what I'm making here, that would seem weird, wouldn't it? Where's the money coming from? And the problem is that in order not to go to jail for tax evasion, you have to figure out how to get that money into your account in a legitimate way. And that's where money laundering comes in, right? So maybe I launder my money through casinos, right? So maybe I go in and play, and the casino is helping me by making me win more often. But really, I'm not winning. They're just giving me my money, and they're taking a cut. You know what I mean? Yeah. So money laundering is all about getting your the money you've earned through criminal activity and somehow making it legitimate. Okay? Anyone seen Breaking Bad? Yeah. Breaking Bad, the whole thing?
Yes.
You remember, so the car wash, when Walt and Skylar buy the car wash, that's money laundering, right? They buy a business and they change the accounting so it looks like the business is making money. And what they're doing is taking Walt's meth money and slowly moving it into their own account. But as you saw, Walt is making so much money that Skylar can't launder it fast enough, right? Because a car wash cannot make, $1 million a month, right? It's impossible. So you see that they get into trouble there. And what? What's that? Oh, I'm sorry. You haven't seen it all yet? Okay. That's not a major plot point, but anyway. Yeah, and the same thing happens with Jesse, right? Jesse buys a nail salon, and his lawyer, Saul Goodman, advises him, that's how you can't spend your criminal money until it gets laundered. And if you buy a business and then you sneak your criminal money into the cash flow, then it looks like you earned it legitimately. And then you can actually spend it and the government won't send you to jail, right? So Again, once upon a time, people used to rob banks, right? Trying to get money out of the bank. Now criminals are trying to get their money into the bank. And that's the tricky part. And that's where money launderers come in. But anyway, that's your little lesson on money laundering for today. So, okay, let's take a little break. When we come back, I have just a short video to show you that talks about a few of the reasons why economic inequality has been growing. And again, not just in the US and Canada, but globally, right? This pattern is happening all around. So let's take a break. We'll come back and then we'll deal with that, okay? Okay, and we're back. So I said that we have, based on the last video we saw, we have pretty significant economic inequality in the US and in Canada. And again, you can extend that to the global stage. There's pretty significant economic inequality in many countries, and around the world we have, again, significant economic inequality. Some people have massive, massive amounts of money. Some people have literally nothing at all, right? And so, again, how do we get there, and what influences that? So, I just wanted to show you a short video on that deals with that idea. And pay attention, because there's going to be 5 causes of economic inequality. Okay, so in the video there'll be 5 causes of economic inequality, just like, I guess that's why the $5 bill is there. 5 causes of economic inequality. Take note of them so that we can talk about them, okay? Online people, of course, the video is posted in Microsoft Teams, so you can watch it. I'll direct you to do that. Go watch it now and then come back. It's only a few minutes long, so we'll see you in just a few minutes, okay? 5 causes of economic inequality. set up here. So, what did they? Yeah, 5 causes of growing economic inequality. What was the first one? What was one of them that they talked about? Technology. What about technology? What about technology? It's what? Okay. What does that mean? Or how does it became bigger, yeah, but how does that create inequality? What's the problem there? You guys shop for your own groceries? Sometimes? Go to Safeway, Save On, whatever. Do you go through the self-scanning thing? Yeah? You go through the self-scanning thing? Yeah, so there's a perfect example of technology that has helped to cause economic inequality, because now, do you need a cashier? No, there's no cashier, right? There used to be a cashier there making, minimum wage, but, still having a job. But now that cashier is gone because the technology has replaced her or him, right? Or them.
Yes.
Or them. Let's see, what else? What's another good example of technology that has replaced people?
And the machines that we,
The what?
the machines that are used to put food, like heavy boxes.
Uh,
Used to pick them first, and then machines that are
Oh, right. Okay. So they used to pick boxes?
like human beings. They used to transport goods from one place
There's
to
robots.
another.
Yeah. So robots and AI are becoming involved in transport and shipping. That's definitely true. Actually, maybe the first one has anyone gotten money out of an ATM?
Good.
Yeah. You used to have to go to the bank if you wanted to get money. You used to have to talk to the teller, right, behind the counter and get your money. Now there's a machine that does that, and of course now we just interact transfer money to people, right? But those technologies are kind of creeping in, and they're displacing people who used to have a job, right? Grocery store workers, transportation workers, bank workers, manufacturing workers. You saw a little clip there in it looked like a car factory, right? And those robotic arms were welding things, and they were bzz, 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 they were welding different spots. Of course, that all used to be done by hand, right? You'd have factory workers in there doing that work. Now, it's all robotic, right? Those guys have no jobs anymore. And so, not only is technology taking people's jobs, but it becomes necessary to actually use technology to do one's job as well, right? How difficult would my job be if I was not very technologically literate? Very hard? Why do you say that? You're right, I think, but why?
Well, because like everything is so technology, rules about actually focusing on they cannot be right.
Yeah, and I think we saw that about a year ago at the beginning of this pandemic, right? So it was just over a year ago when when our college closed, and we went online, and we went online in the space of a weekend. So we decided on Friday, I think it was March 13th, I remember this fairly clearly. We decided on March 13th that we were going to close the college, and Monday morning we were an online school, and everyone had to figure out how to do that in 2 days, right? And so you can imagine, if you weren't really good with computers, and if you hadn't really been using one, might that be difficult? Yeah, it was hugely difficult if you weren't good with computers, right? Like I figured out how to stream things. I use a lot of visual stuff in my classes anyway, right? sometimes I'm up here talking, sometimes you're reading, but there's always visuals, right? There's always something on the screen. Almost never have I taught any part of a class that has nothing on the screen, right? So I already had a bunch of visuals. All I had to do was figure out how to broadcast and stream it. And I did. Within the space of 2 days, I figured out how to, I got streaming software, I figured out how the software worked, I played around with it, and I did it, right? But again, a lot of people didn't use technology to that degree. Some people use a lot of books and papers and they write on the board. They don't do a lot of visual things like I do. And so that was much more difficult for them to make that transition, right? So again, technology is not only taking people's jobs, but it's becoming increasingly important in terms of being able to do the jobs that exist, right? What was number 2? Do you remember? Or just any other one? Globalization. What were they talking about there? What were they talking about under globalization? Something about China? What's the deal with China? They're getting richer? Why are they getting richer? Yeah, because they basically manufacture everything in the world, right? Everything is now made in China, right? And so China's done a good job of getting its economy going by building a massive manufacturing sector, by entering into the World Trade Organization, and as a result, they've become very economically powerful and wealthy, but those jobs have also disappeared from other countries, right? Other countries that used to manufacture things, now not so much, right? And again, the US, if you went back to the United States 100 years ago, the United States was a huge manufacturing economy. So they built everything. There were factories all over the place. But nowadays, not so much, right? A lot of those jobs, again, have gone to China because that's where things are made now, right? Things are made in China. What else? What's the third one? Tech change, globalization. Right, the rise of the superpowers. What were they talking about there? US and Canada were what? Oh, yeah. Yes, but I think they were talking about economic superpowers, not political ones. Yeah, so what are some of the biggest companies in the world? Yeah, Amazon, Apple, right? They're massive, massive companies. Do you think it is easy to compete with those? No, right? They're so big, they're so good, they have distribution everywhere, they've got lots of money to run ads all over the world. They become very difficult to compete with, and so smaller businesses go out of business because they can't compete, right? Amazon is so good right now, why would you order anything from anywhere else, right? It's so easy, it's so quick. If you wanted to order something online and you said, I'm not going to use Amazon, what would you use? What else is there? I guess you could go to like a company's website and create an account and order it from the website. You can do that. But is there an alternative to Amazon? No, right? They're too big, and nobody can even start to compete with them because you would be tiny and they're massive and nobody would ever hear of you, right? These companies are really big. They're hard to compete with. They put smaller companies out of business. And again, they are they centralize more wealth, right? And so someone like Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, has a ridiculous amount of money now. And, he's kind of doing that. That's money that a bunch of smaller business owners would have made in the past. But now these companies are so big and so massive that they make huge amounts of money, right? And the people who work there, especially the higher CEOs and things like that, they make massive amounts of money as well. Fourth one. Right. What was the fourth one? What's that? Falling labor. Okay, what was that about? Was it what?
The same as technological change.
I think they might have used one of the graphs, one of the same graphs. But what were they? They were talking about trade unions, weren't they? What's a trade union or a workers' union? Okay, a group of workers, and tradespeople. What do they do? What does this union do? They have their rights. Yeah, the union advocates for the rights of the workers, right? So, again, if you want to go in and ask your boss for a raise, and if I say, if I go to Daniel, who's my boss, and I say, Daniel, I want a raise, and if you don't give me a raise, I'm going to quit right now. What will you say? Bye. Maybe, right? So I have no leverage, right? I can't pressure my boss to give me a raise. I'm at my boss's mercy, right? Maybe he likes me and he'll give me a raise. Maybe he doesn't like me and he won't. Maybe my threat to quit, maybe I'll actually have to do it, and that would really stink. But I have no leverage, right? But if the factory has a union, right, and we're all united, and I'm the union rep, and I go into my boss Daniel's office and I say, Daniel, we've all been talking and I think we don't make enough money. We want a raise in our salary, and if you don't give it to us, nobody's coming into work tomorrow. Different, right? Now you've got a problem, don't you? Yeah, because Daniel's factory needs to run tomorrow, and it's not going to run with nobody working there. So now he has to deal with me, right? Before he could just say, well, there's the door, right? But now, because we're unionized, we've got a lot more power, we've got a lot more leverage, and Daniel's going to have to start negotiating, right? But as you saw, trade unions are becoming less and less common, right? In fact, there was a news story this past week about, you can dig into it on your own if you want, but I think it's Alabama. Is it Alabama? It's Alabama, and Amazon workers in Alabama are trying to unionize. They're trying to form a union. Amazon, of course, is fighting that because they don't want their workers to be in a union, right? Because then the workers will have leverage, and then Jeff Bezos might have to pay them better or give them better benefits, right? So if they're not unionized, then it's just a bunch of individual people. And if somebody wants more money, Jeff Bezos can tell them to hit the bricks, right? Get out of here. But if Amazon workers are unionized, he's going to have to negotiate, right? And he's probably going to wind up having to give them shorter working hours, better working conditions, more money, maybe better health care. Ugh, horrible, right? So Amazon is going to fight this and try to make sure that the workers do not unionize. But again, when you don't have these unions and you don't have government protections in place, workers' benefits and salaries go down, their working hours tend to go up, their working conditions tend to get poorer, and that's kind of what we see, right? So the number of unions have been going down. And what's the last one? What's the last one? Say what? Oh, seizing the advantage. Yeah, what was that? Oh, what was that about? Yeah, so people with money and people with power will try to use that money and power to hold on to their advantage or to gain even greater advantage, right? And so the example they gave in the video was this scandal where a couple of celebrities were using their money to, I think they, gosh, what did they do? Did they pay people to write their daughter's entrance exam into a fancy college? I think that's what they did. And so, you know, the idea here is that, you know, people can use their money and power to take things away from other people, right? Or to gain even more, right? Whether they're pushing politicians for tax breaks or whether they're paying to get their kids into the fanciest universities or the best universities, all those things ensure that people who have money and power keep it, and people who don't have money and don't have power, that it becomes harder for them to achieve those things, right? I wanted to show you, yeah, so you can see this happening here when they were talking about the rise of these superpowers, right? So again, if you look at in 1980, CEOs of companies made about 33 times? 33 times more than the average worker, which is a lot, right? That's a lot more money. That was in 1980. But here, jump ahead to 2015, and CEOs are making 200 times what the average worker is making, right? And is that in any way fair, right? Certainly being a CEO is more difficult, right? You need a different skill set, different knowledge. It's probably very stressful sometimes because you're making decisions that affect the entire company, right? So being a CEO is not easy, right? You're responsible for big decisions and for charting a direction and strategy and all that stuff. But are those guys really working 200 times harder than their average worker? Seems like a lot, right? Do you think it's possible for anyone to work as hard in a single day as someone else does in an entire year? Well, maybe if that person's really lazy, but no, right? These are huge differences. And if you look, you'll see that this difference, this disparity, this inequality from CEO salary to average worker salary, it isn't like that in all places, right? So here you see the US is wildly out of balance, right? There's no inequality there at all. But if you look at most other countries, it's a lot closer, right? Here in Canada, 20-1. 20 is still a lot, right? Someone making 20 times more than the average worker is a lot of money, but it's not 475 times. Again, that seems excessive, does it not? The question I want to ask you here, just to take a little bit of a pause, is which ones of these do you think are most likely to affect you? Because you all are going to, this is a world with pretty significant economic inequality, and you all are going to join it, right? You all are going to have jobs and careers in this world. So which one of these things do you think is most likely to affect you in the world of the future? are you concerned that machines and AI might be able to do, the job that you would like to do?
Yeah, maybe the future is not like bankers, doctor, even teacher, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's worth, I don't know if it's worth worrying about, but it's worth thinking about, right? Is it possible that a robot could do my job better than I do?
Yes.
Or some sort of AI program that just continually tests you and finds out what you don't know and then, keeps sending you lessons that are custom tailored to, what you know and what you don't? I don't know. A teaching algorithm could probably do more than I could, right? Any algorithm can do more than almost any human can, but do we want that, right? What about globalization? Certainly some countries are very rich and some countries are very poor, but do you see that continuing? Do you think poor countries are going to have an easy time becoming richer or not? No? Why not?
The rate is going up. For example, in our country, workforce, we're not getting any richer.
It's true.
Like, more happening in the country.
Yeah, it's true, right? And the richest and most powerful countries in the world today, for the most part, are the richest and most powerful countries that were around 100 years ago, right? Maybe with the exception of China. And China's a bit of a different thing, but Britain, France, Germany, Canada, the US, those what's that?
They've always been rich.
Yeah, they've always been rich.
They are rich for a while.
Yeah, still are. And in 100 years, do you think they still will be?
Possible.
Possible, yeah. And again, China's a little weird because it's just kind of popped up and become wealthy, but can any country do that, right? What about that rise of superpowers thing? Do you think that will affect us in any way? Like the fact that some companies are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and sort of choking out any smaller companies that might exist?
There'd be no room for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, there'd be no room for entrepreneurs, right? Actually, one of the fields that's been like this for a while is automotive making, and so there haven't been a ton of new car brands ever because starting an automobile factory is not an easy thing to do. It takes a massive amount of money to design a car, to build a plant, to You question what?
I just disregard
Disregard it?
Yes.
Okay. Like the whole thing? Or are you sure? What do you want? You can say what you want if you want to.
Why plant? Why do you need plant?
Why what?
Why do you need to build a plant?
Why do you need to build a plant?
Yes.
So you can build your cars. Like you need a factory, right? So if I want to start a car, if I want to start a car company, I've got to design a car from the ground up. I've got to design all the parts. I've got to build a factory. I've got to manufacture those cars. Then I've got to get them to dealers, and I've got to get dealers to sell them. And then I've got to actually get people to buy them. And that whole process, from designing the car to selling it, takes years and years and years, and it takes a massive amount of money. And so most people won't provide you with that amount of funding, not knowing if your car will sell, right? It's too expensive. And so Elon Musk has managed to do it with Tesla, right? But it's not that easy to do, right? And so most of the car companies that are around are companies that have been around for a long time, right? General Motors, Ford, Toyota, Nissan, Honda, Jaguar, Maserati. Yeah, those companies have been around for a very long time, right? And so it's really hard to do. And so again, if you wanted to build computers, if you want to build laptops, you can build them, but is it going to be easy to compete with Apple? Real tough, right? You can't take them on. They're too big, right? They have too much market share. But is that a good thing for us? Maybe entering into the working world? I don't know. Okay, let me see what my next slide here is. Right, okay. Okay. So I'm going to press pause on that for today. We're going to come back tomorrow and we'll talk about this idea of social mobility and the idea that, again, if you have a group of people living in poverty in your country, and all countries have this, do they have the ability to raise themselves up? Do they have the ability to climb the economic ladder and achieve a better life? And again, as we mentioned, the United States is kind of founded on this myth of the American dream, but the statistics would tell you that that's actually kind of not true. It's actually very difficult to rise up the economic ladder in the US if you start at the bottom or close to the bottom. But that's what we'll talk about tomorrow. That is all I have for you today. You can pack it up. Have a nice afternoon. I'll see you tomorrow or in 20 minutes.
There you go.